Hey guys, Dr. Mike Hansen here, and welcome to another video right here in New York City, a city that has great water. Probably the best water of any US city, perfectly fine to drink from the tap. I mean, it's what makes New York City's bagels and pizza and bread so good, right? The water comes from reservoirs in upstate New York in the Catskill region. But do you know who had the worst drinking water of any city in the US? In April 1993, more and more Milwaukee residents were coming down with a mystery illness, with the main symptoms being watery diarrhea and abdominal cramps. At the same time, the water there was looking and tasting less than stellar with increased turbidity. Meanwhile, people would buy drinking water from a grocery store or even boil their water. Although that was a way of getting around the problem, it still didn't address the underlying cause of the problem. It took a little while, but investigators finally figured out that the water supply was contaminated with crypto, as in the protozoan parasite, Cryptosporidium. They determined that the water filtration process was not properly eliminating this parasite from the water, and that sewage was being dumped too close to the water intake region in Lake Michigan. Once they were able to identify the underlying cause of the problem, they were able to fix it, and today Milwaukee has some of the best drinking water of any US city. But why is this story relevant to modern medicine today? Because when it comes to metabolic illness, things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and even some forms of dementia and cancer, modern medicine doesn't treat the root cause of these metabolic problems. For example, here we have global mortality from the #1 killer, cardiovascular disease. The rates continue to climb despite modern medicine. The medicine we have for type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and so forth, those medicines might make lab tests look better, they might make numbers look better, like blood pressure numbers, but are they really treating the underlying cause of the problem? There's no question that, generally speaking, the United States has the best doctors, hospitals, and medical technology. We have the most innovative surgeries. You have the Hospital for Special Surgery right here in New York City. You have the latest and greatest drugs, and we spend the most per capita on healthcare of all the countries on the globe. Therefore, we must be the healthiest country on the planet, right? We must have the best healthcare on the planet, right? We must be the country that lives the longest, right? Except we're not on all three of those accounts. Let's take a look for a second at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. That consists of the 38 most developed countries. Now take a look at this. Life expectancy, every OECD country has been uptrending in life expectancy better than the United States. The US really plateaued from 2014 to 2019 and then had a big decline with COVID in 2020. Now some might say that the plateau was because of the opioid epidemic, and no doubt that played a part. But the bigger picture is what people are eating. Look at who's doing it best, Japan. They continue to uptrend their life expectancy. Japan is one of the 5 blue zones on the planet, meaning where people live the longest and are the healthiest. The traditional Japanese diet is a whole foods-based diet, meaning food that is unprocessed or minimally processed. Their diet consists mostly of fish and other seafood, plant-based foods, and minimal amounts of added sugars. In that regard, it's very similar to the Mediterranean diet. This is the rate of hospital admission rates for diabetes in 2009 and 2019. White circle, 2009, purple circle, 2019. So in 2019, US had the highest rates. Sure, some of those are related to type 1 diabetes, but most are type 2 diabetes, which is a consequence of consuming too much sugar. The US is the 3rd highest in overweight obesity and not ranking well in Alzheimer's, cancer, and cardiovascular disease either. So how is it possible that the US has the most expensive drugs and doctors, we spend the most on hospitals and inpatient care, and yet we're the sickest of all the developed countries? And why is it that it continues to get worse despite us spending more and more money? In the past, we weren't exactly stellar with our healthcare spending, but at least we're on par with other countries. But starting in the 70s, things got worse, giving us the train wreck that we have today. The US has never seen health like this before, but how can we fix the problem if we can't even identify the problem, much like the Cryptosporidium outbreak in Milwaukee? To understand the problem, you have to understand something that didn't start emerging until the 1980s, and that's something called metabolic syndrome. Let's start by defining metabolism. It's the chemical processes that occur within a living organism in order to maintain life. In other words, it's your energy needed to live. Metabolic syndrome entails abnormal metabolism in various cells and organs of the body with specific health consequences. A prime example is type 2 diabetes. Right now, 35 million Americans have type 2 diabetes, about 10% of the population. Want to guess what it was in 1960? 1% of the population. Today, 1 in 10 Americans require some kind of drug for their diabetes, whether that's metformin, glipizide, sitagliptin, and in cases of advanced diabetes, insulin. In 2000, about 150 million people had diabetes. As of 2019, 463 million. In the projection for 2030, 560 million, 7% of the global population. But let's get back to the United States for a second. Despite all of our knowledge about diabetes and the medicines available, and more people exercising, and even Obamacare, why is our health getting worse? Because we've yet to address the true cause of the problem. 80% of disease is preventable with preventative habits, meaning lifestyle habits. Yet 98% of our healthcare budget is spent on individual treatment, and only 2% on prevention. Seems like that money could be better spent. It's estimated that 12% of the US adult population is affected by 5 or more chronic diseases and account for 40% of all healthcare spending. On average, patients with 5 or more chronic conditions spend 14 times more on health services than people with no chronic conditions. These are the rates of cancer incidence, meaning number of new cancers per year. The incidence of smoke-related cancer declined, as expected, because of a decline in smoking rates. The incidence of cancers that are detectable by better and more frequent screenings, like prostate and breast cancer, those increased because we're better at catching them. We catch them earlier. But the incidence of most other cancers, especially the ones that are correlated with obesity and metabolic syndrome, things like uterine, pancreatic, and liver cancer, they increased about 30%. As a whole, more and more people are getting cancer every year. Sure, genetics contributes to that, and some cancers are purely genetic. For example, there's a condition called FAP, familial adenomatous polyposis. This condition is caused by a specific genetic defect that essentially guarantees someone will develop colon cancer, typically when they're in their 40s or 50s. But overall, for most cancers, genetics only contributes about 20%. Smoking and diet, about 50%. In the US, the leading causes of morbidity and mortality are the most costly. We're talking cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, and type 2 diabetes. Most of these stem from being metabolically ill and are heavily impacted by the food that we eat. At least 60% of our healthcare spending is wasted on diseases that could have been prevented. And guess where that money's coming from? Social Security, but it's only going to get worse because you need young, healthy people to pay into that Social Security as they get older. But what happens when the young and the healthy are becoming less and less healthy? I mean, adolescents, they would never develop metabolic disease until the 1980s. So if the problem is metabolic illness, then what's the solution? It's real food. It's unprocessed or minimally processed food. The answer is simple and easy, but actually doing that might not be for some people. But the reality is that there's no magic pill that can fix these metabolic illnesses. The only way that it can be fixed is by eating real food. Okay, so most people know that eating crappy food, it leads to high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. I mean, they're all related to obesity, right? But what about most types of cancer, autoimmune disease, dementia, and even psychiatric illness? Is it really possible that eating too much processed food is linked with those things? Yes, all those things that I just mentioned have become more and more prevalent over the last 50 years, which is the same timeline as the timeline that we've been eating more and more processed food. Cancer is being diagnosed at earlier ages than it used to be. Over the last few decades, as we've consumed more and more processed food, the incidence of obesity-related cancers continues to rise. So think colon, liver, pancreatic, uterine, and kidney cancer. In fact, just last year, the recommended age to screen for colon cancer was lowered from 50 to 45 because of the rise in cases among young and middle-aged people. No doubt, genetics, it plays a role in cancer, but there's a strong case to be made that environmental exposures cause mutations in DNA. For example, the UV rays from the sun that damage the DNA in your skin cells, which can lead to skin cancer. But mutations in our cells occur throughout the body every day, like every minute. In other words, your cells initiate cancer all the time, but your cells, and especially your immune system, fix these mutations before the cancer actually develops. It gets nipped in the bud until it doesn't. And that's when cancer promotion happens. That's when the cancer cells start growing and dividing over and over again. And as wild as this may sound, highly processed foods like hot dogs, French fries, and Oreos actually feeds those cancer cells exactly what it needs to keep growing and dividing. So let's say you sink your teeth into a Krispy Kreme donut. That sugar that you eat allows the cancer cell's ability to divide and conquer. Specifically, it serves as the backbone of the ribose molecule in DNA and RNA. Now, what about autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease? Autoimmune diseases were thought to attack randomly and have a genetic component, but we're discovering more and more about the role of your gut bacteria having a say in this. The immune system, it targets the bad bacteria in the gut. Now, when it does this, there's collateral damage and inflammation ensues, even in other parts of the body. And guess what causes you to have the bad bacteria proliferate in the gut? That's right, processed food, too much processed food. Before processed food came along, our gut bacteria would always get exactly what it wanted, and that would be fiber, aka prebiotics. And I'll go more into prebiotics and probiotics in a separate video. But with processed food, those bacteria are starved of fiber, so they get angry. They say, fine, if you're not going to give me fiber, I'll start eating the mucin from the lining of your gut. So the lining of your gut starts to erode away, and now certain molecules that normally can't pass through your gut, they start to make their way into the bloodstream. So now you have molecules that don't belong in the bloodstream, and the immune system says, hey, you're not supposed to be here, and goes into attack mode to kick out that enemy invader. And that's how you get this chronic inflammation in your body. To make matters even worse, many animals are fed antibiotics, and when we eat those animals, we also ingest those antibiotics, which kill off the good bacteria in our gut. So the bottom line, the more processed food you eat, the worse off your gut bacteria, the more likely you're going to have metabolic illness and chronic inflammation. The brain suffers as well. Processed food worsens your cognitive ability. And mental health, well, rates of depression and schizophrenia over the last decade have had a 20% increase. And that was before it really skyrocketed with COVID. Dementia was pretty rare before processed food came along. In the 1970s, 10% of 85-year-olds would get Alzheimer's. It's about double that now. But at this point, it's only correlation, and so far there's no proof of causation. With infectious diseases and purely genetic diseases, those have the potential to be fixed with drugs and other treatments. But when it comes to metabolic diseases, drugs, they can make the numbers look better. They can make the blood pressure numbers look better. They can make the labs look better, but they're not getting to the core of the problem, the root cause of the problem. You can't fix healthcare until you fix health, and you can't fix health until you fix the food that we're eating. What you put in your body, it really matters. So that's going to be all for this video. Thank you for watching, and I want to give a big thank you to all of you who've subscribed to my channel as I've just hit that 1 million mark. Of course, I couldn't have done it without you and the team that's behind me, so I want to give a shout out to my editor, Brad, and some other people on my team who've helped out tremendously, including Mosh. So thank you to all of you, and I have something special I want to show you. All right, so here's the plaque that YouTube sent me for hitting 1 million. Again, thank you very much. I want to keep this YouTube channel going and growing, especially because when I first started this channel, the primary goal was to combat misinformation and make a huge impact in people's lives, to get people to live as healthy and long as possible. And so I think that the more that we grow, the bigger that we get, the more of an impact we'll have. So again, thank you so much.